Good morning and welcome, everybody. Glad to see so many faces here this morning. So it's my pleasure this morning to welcome our presenter, our director, Susan Hoskins, and she's going to share with us about some tornadoes from the county's past. Timely topic as we hit severe weather season, right? So with that, we'll let Susan tell us what she knows.
All right. Thanks, Treva. So first of all, there have been a lot of tornadoes in the county throughout history. And I know, we're not going to talk about the 1969 tornado or the Chandler tornado or the Tyler tornado. So really my focus was on some photographs that were taken of the 1927 tornado. And then I reread our press release and it said I was going to talk about 3, so I threw some others in there. But Pipestone County really does see its fair share of violent weather. And in this region, that really includes tornadoes. So we were just talking before here with some of you that tornadoes are such a localized disaster, not like floods or hurricane winds or things like that. It's either you're in the path of the tornado or you're not. There have been a lot of tornadoes in Pipestone County, all different strengths. But this one in 1927, which came near Jasper, became kind of famous nationwide. So let's get into this. So has anybody seen the movie Twisters? Yeah, it's a good movie. This tornado was really nothing like that. So that was really very dangerous. Nobody got hurt in the 1927 tornado. It did some property damage, but there were no fatalities. But this is a very fun movie. So, other tornadoes, kind of before the 1927 tornado. So the 1913 tornado, which happened in Eden and Gray Townships on the 4th of July, no less, it actually traveled to 4 miles south of Pipestone. And we have this very grainy photograph of it, this one here. You can kind of see a funnel cloud in the distance. So we have a photo of it. It's not very clear. It formed a few miles northwest of Island and traveled 10 miles. And it was kind of bouncing along the ground, as they do, being on the ground, in the air, on the ground. And it formed about, it was traveling eastward and into Gray Township, and it formed about 5 or 6 p.m. That's a very common time in the evening for these type of storms to come up. So it was a strange storm in that it was reported that there wasn't any rain or hail involved with this, just this funnel cloud that came through. So I read all these newspapers accounts, and of course, tornadoes are strange beasts. So they give all the destruction details. So in Eden Township, at the Frank Price Farm, and I have to tell you, I did not have time to get out my plat maps and show you exactly where these tornadoes went. But I do have some names, but then again, it was 1913, so I don't know if anyone knows where Frank Price lived. But the barn was demolished, but the house was okay. The chimney was toppled. And this is really fascinating. As I said, there were no fatalities. Mr. Price was in the barn, and 2/3 of it were totally taken away. And he and the horses were in the third that remained. So that was outstanding. So Mrs. Price, however, was out in the storm, and she was physically lifted and carried several rods, but was unhurt. It just put her back down. How terrifying is that? So, of course, I know rods is a measurement that's not really used anymore, so I looked it up for you, and it's about 16.5 feet. So several, or 5.5 yards, so several yards. She was, really carried quite a ways. So it bounced northeast to German Hall, where it destroyed the barn, and it twisted the German Hall structure just on its foundation. So, and here's the interesting point. There was supposed to be a children's event held there for the 4th of July, but it had been postponed because of superstitions for holding it on a Friday. I know, but it turned out well for them because there was nobody there. Next, it went to the Thomas Cheney farm, and this farm was directly in the path, and everything was destroyed. And this is an image, of course, people have to pose in the wreckage. So it destroyed the house, the barn, the granary, the hog house, the machine shed, the corn crib, the windmill, everything was flattened at the Thomas Cheney farm. The family was in the cellar of the house, and the house was physically lifted up and thrown down some distance away. Some parts traveled over 3 miles. Then it went east to the Rudolph Brune farm, where outbuildings were destroyed. It went to the George Armstrong farm, where outbuildings were destroyed, and a lot of his cows and pigs were killed. And then it dissipated north of Hatfield after it had gone 10 miles, but then it actually reformed in Murray County and did a lot of damage there. So tornadoes are just the strangest thing. So that was in 1913. And in 1924, and again, we have the grainy photograph of the tornado, and this one went right through Airlie. Pretty much doomed the town there, never really recovered. So it was again at 6 p.m. It came into town from the west, kind of went right through it. So the townspeople saw it coming. That's the thing about being out here on the prairie, is you can see these things coming and you just don't know if it's going to change direction or what. So there's almost a comical description in the newspaper of the residents of Airlie loading up in cars, like cars made for 5 people. They were fitting 11 people in the cars, and they drove half a mile north, 1 mile west, 1 mile south, and half a mile east, watching the tornado go right through their town. So they saw it happen. So coming into town from the west, the post office was damaged, but to the north of there, the Fred Dom's garage, completely demolished. North of the garage was the house of Ed Taylor. It was moved off its foundation, and although still standing, a total loss. It was kind of twisted, had to be completely rebuilt. East of the Taylors was the High Miller house, and this is the locally famous photograph of the house that's upside down. And that happened to the High Miller's house. So according to eyewitnesses, which was the town in those crowded cars circling the destruction, they saw the house lifted up 40 feet, turned over, and laid fair. They said it didn't just drop, it was kind of laid gently down on its roof. So we have a great picture of that. So the house, unfortunately for the High Millers, they just were completely destroyed. So they also had a garage, and the car in the garage was blown out of the garage, and then the house landed right on the car. So they should have hopped in the car and drove around like everybody else. But the High Millers also had, this was in the newspaper, 200 plus fine Plymouth chickens, which were annihilated. So there were dead chickens everywhere, out of town, the way that the tornado went, except for the few that were running around with no feathers at all. Just terrible, terrible thing. Other homes were damaged. The tornado headed east of town, out of town, and crossed several farms before it dissolved. So it left broken fences, broken trees, damaged outbuildings, but the real damage was in Airlie. The funnel was small, and the destruction wasn't very wide, and that's what most of these tornadoes are, extremely localized. So. But if you're in that path, it will do damage. The cloud funnel that formed from this, they said, was unusually high, the cloud base. So it had a very long funnel cloud, a long tail. So we get to the Jasper Tornado. And I call it that just because that's where it was closest to. So this is the one I really wanted to tell you about. We recently came into some of these photographs and researched this event. I had kind of heard about it, but I didn't understand what exactly had happened. So on Friday, July 8th, 1927, at 7 p.m., a tornado formed in the sky north and west of Jasper. And as a lot of this kind of weather, it behaved strangely. You know, if the weather is ever strange, pay attention to it. According to the accounts, the sky was actually mostly blue. The sun was shining, but there was this one strange cloud forming from which big drops of rain fell, some scattered hail, walnut-sized hail. And from the strange white cloud, a small boiling projection emerged, and before long, it grew an absolutely huge tail, really, really long tail, and it became a huge wiggling snake and created a vast cloud of dust when it touched the ground. And it was traveling in a southeasterly direction. So this great article in the Jasper Journal talks about, again, so many people in Jasper, it was coming right for them. They hopped in their cars and they drove out of town. But it never actually made it to Jasper. This was the photograph that was in the Jasper paper. So this was interesting. It was actually taken by A.H. Adams and published in the Argus Leader newspaper. And then the Jasper Journal got permission to reprint it. And that you can kind of see they call the bottom of it the broom. And this actually looks like a broom. It's sweeping across the prairie there. But again, a really grainy photo. Here is a series of pictures of the tornado forming. And interestingly, I think these might have been taken by C.E. Sohn, the Pipestone photographer. But it's not clear. This is actually from the collection of the Rock County Historical Society. So people in Jasper could see the tornado coming their way. Many of them fled town, heading east or south. But before it reached Jasper, it broke into two places and disappeared. So this is just a great, great photographs of a tornado forming. So I'll just tell you where it went. It went by the Oscar Omdahl place, northwest of Jasper. And from there, it traveled southeast to Oscar Coulsred place, and it passed over the house, and the air, it wasn't on the ground, but the air pressure from it sucked the dishes off the table. They're getting ready for supper. It went on to the Ole Peterson place, where it pulled the windmill wheel off the tower, and it deposited it over in a grain field, but neither the wheel or the tower were really damaged. It could just be put back together. It also moved his water tank. And it cut a path through fields of grain, leaving a black streak 60 feet wide, so that was the area of the destruction, past the William Meyer place, past the Jim Mannion place, and over the August Carlson farm, which at that time was rented to Ed Coleman, and the cloud fell apart at that time. So it never actually reached Jasper. And here's another great photo of this tornado, which is copyrighted C.E. Sohn of the photograph studio here in Pipestone. It's got an extremely long wiggly tail on there. And you could kind of see you can see parts of the tornado, the cloud at the bottom. The way the debris is kind of swirling around the funnel itself. So I thought this was fun. It's just how people are today. It's how people have always been. So the newspaper then reported that the tornado out here on the prairie, it's visible all miles around in every direction. So parties from Sioux Falls, Ash Creek, Pipestone, Hardwick, and other towns reported seeing this tornado. And in fact, the Jasper Telephone Exchange reported over 2,000 phone calls were registered at the office during the evening from outside parties wanting to know what happened. So only a short while after the tornado passed, people from other towns and cars started showing up. And I think that's, just like today, it is people showing up to help, and it's people showing up to see what they can see. Oh, and that was fun. They called them hello girls. So I thought that was fun, the telephone operators. So this is what I wanted to tell you about Lucille Handberg, a 16-year-old girl, took a very famous photograph of this tornado. So she chased the tornado a quarter mile. She took a total of 3 photographs. And her motivation, she wanted to win the prize at the state fair for the most unusual photograph. And I bet she probably won. When Lucille saw the tornado forming, she ran. Now, she was living on a farm in Alliance Township, Moody County, which Pipestone County butts right up to South Dakota. Moody County's right there. Minnehaha County is just right in the corner there. And then Pipestone County and Rock County all kind of meet. So she's in Moody County. A lot of information refers to her of Sherman, so she's right in that neighborhood. She saw the tornado forming. She ran into the house to get her camera, and while she was getting her camera, the funnel dropped 3 miles away from her at the Oscar Coolshred farm, and it was not on the ground when it passed over that house, and so it only took the chimney off, broke treetops, and that's where it sucked the dinner plates off the table and distributed them all the way to the barn, unbroken. But dinner was ruined. So by the time she got her camera and ran out the back door, and she specifically said that she ran out the back door because her dad was in the front yard and she didn't think he would approve of her chasing after a tornado. So when she got out the back, the tornado was 2 miles closer to her, and she snapped it. This talks about 3 photos. I have only been able to really find 2 photos. So she snapped picture number 1 when it was 5,000 feet away, heading towards the Peterson farm, which was half a mile from her. The tornado sideswiped the Petersons' house, left half the house standing, scattered the windmill, the water tank, and the outbuildings over another mile. When the tornado was about a quarter mile from Lucille, it abruptly changed direction, which is something that they do. And it began heading away from her. She snapped picture number 2. She later said that the bottom of the tornado, or the broom, technical term, I guess, was visibly contracting and expanding like it was breathing as it was on the ground, which is a little creepy. And then she took picture number 3 when the bottom or the broom was directly opposite her and the top or the head had changed courses at right angles, and then the tube was stretched out so that it really developed an unusual loop, and you'll see that in the pictures. So it soon diminished, lifted off the ground, and 3 minutes after her last photograph, which is forever in tornado time, it broke in half and the lower section vanished, floating away as a cloud of dust. And then the top withdrew back into the clouds. So this is Lucille. She was born in 1911. She was 16 years old at the time of this tornado. Later on, she attended the St. Cloud's Teachers College, and I found information that said she was an outstanding member of the camera club. Of course, she's really into photography, and she directed photography for the 1931 yearbook. So she was probably a pretty accomplished camera or photographer in 1927. This is one of her photos. It's just spectacular. There's a lot of detail. It's pretty close to her. I don't think her dad was probably too happy. So Lucille, as I talked about her, she was born in 1911 in South Dakota. She grew up in Moody County, right over the border, and she was recorded there in 1920, 1925, 1930, all the census records, and she was 16 years old in 1927. And I wasn't able to identify any type of photography that Lucille did after she graduated from college. She married, and she married in 1934, and the record states that she was from Sherman, but living in Moody County, South Dakota. And her husband, Kenneth Hollister, was also from Sherman, but living in Minnehaha County, because the line is right there. And both Lucille and Kenneth are buried in the Jasper City Cemetery in Pipestone County. So Lucille died in 1955, and Kenneth died in 1971. So Lucille wanted this photograph, as I said, for the state fair. And I've not been able to determine exactly if she was entering it in the South Dakota State Fair as a resident or in the Minnesota State Fair as a non-resident. But what I was able to determine is Lucille, the farm girl from the rural Jasper area, enforced the copyright to her probably award-winning photograph. She probably did win the state fair. But she, one of the articles said, quoting, "Realizing the value of the photograph, Miss Handberg sent it to Washington for a copyright for which she paid the $1 fee. A short time after the copyright was issued, the girl was rushed with requests for the picture. At time, about 8 to 10 letters arrived daily." So and actually the Illustrated London News was the first European paper to publish it. And from that office, it was circulated to other parts of Europe. It was also published in a Philippine newspaper. So she really got a lot of attention from this photo. This is the article. I was searching newspapers online. This exact article showed up nationwide, and I've listed a number of the papers that it ran in all over the country. So I believe picture number, well, 1 or 2. See, there's not 3 on here, but we know there's the 2 photos. There's the one with the windmill over there, and then there's the one with just the barn building over here. Spectacular photos. And they were running nationwide a year later, so it took a year. And it didn't seem to ever run in the Jasper or the Pipestone Star. So I imagine they ran that photo from, they borrowed it from the Argus Leader. And I imagine perhaps she didn't get hers printed right away and was saving it for the state fair, so it wasn't available to the local papers. I don't know why they wouldn't run it. So now, scientifically, the national articles included this drawing, which was also copyrighted by Lucille Handberg. Presumably, she drew this to explain how the tornado formed and how it dissipated. So Montgomery Meigs had the photograph circulated among scientists, and by his calculation, the broom was 300 feet in diameter. The sharply defined core was 32 feet, and the expanded to 93 feet in diameter at the top, or the head of the funnel. And he further said that the bottom was rotating at a slower lateral speed, which allowed it to stretch out. So it was spinning at different speeds and kind of got real drug out. And he was very interested in Lucille's photographs in helping scientists to gain understanding of tornadoes, how they formed, how they dissipated, how they worked. And that's something they talk about a lot in those Twister movies. We still don't fully understand how tornadoes are working. And Lucille got in on that in 1927. She drew this drawing to explain what she had seen. Interestingly, even though there were apparently other photographs, as I've shown you, of this unusual tornado by A.H. Adams, published in the Argus Leader, by C.E. Sohn, the Pipestone photographer, and possibly several others, a lot of people had cameras at that time. Lucille's is the one that became famous. And it's a very good photograph of a tornado, particularly for 1927. And as I showed you the other couple actual tornado pictures we have, they're kind of grainy, blurry, you can't see much. So this one really had legs of its own, and it entered pop culture even when it was featured in not one but two music albums. So in 1974, the band Deep Purple used it on their album cover for their album Stormbringer, appropriately named, but they took some artistic license and they reversed the image and I added a unicorn. So, and then in 1986, the band Susie and the Banshees used it without all the artistic license on the cover of their album Tinderbox. And this is the actual photo. And you can see they flipped it in this photo. And they got a unicorn there. So, or maybe that's a Pegasus. Maybe it's not a unicorn. Anyway, it's not clear where the copyright was at these late dates. I imagine that they maybe paid Lucille's heirs to use these photos because they are copyrighted photos. So, okay, so I found an article at the museum here, filed by Matt St. Aubin in 1994 in an independent social project that he entitled Pipestone County Tornadoes. And he had searched, his sources were the Pipestone County Star and other newspapers. So I'm not sure how deeply he looked around the county because there's a lot of newspapers that have been published throughout the county. And he found, well, his reference dates were from 1900 to 1989. And he found 31 separate tornadoes / funnel clouds reported. He also found an interesting 30-year pattern in that from 1900 to 1908, there were no tornadoes. And 30 years later, from 1935 to 1944, there were no tornadoes. And then 30 years later, from 1970 to 1978, there were no tornadoes. So he does recognize that some of them might not have been reported or reported in the news sources he was looking at, which is definitely the case, but it would be very interesting to do a more scientific study on tornadoes in Pipestone County. I know there's been a number of recent ones in the, totally within living memory that I'm sure you could all name a few right off the top of your head. But in looking in our tornado file that we have here in our information, I believe the most recent one that we had a clipping of, doesn't mean there hasn't been one since then, but there was a tornado that went just west of Pipestone in 2016. It didn't come through town. And I believe there was one in 1911 in Ruthven, or 2011 in Ruthven, and of course there was one in 1967 or 69 in Pipestone County here. But we need a young scientist or an old scientist to work up a study because it's really quite fascinating where the tornadoes have gone, and the stories, they're just wild to hear how the things are embedded within wood. Straw is embedded in tree trunks and all kinds of things like that. And how things are lifted way up and placed down without being broken. I'm going to think of Mrs. Price for quite a while, I think. Can't imagine. So, thank you for coming to hear about Lucille Handberg's 1927 tornado photographs. And keep an eye out on those album covers. You just never know when Pipestone County is going to show up. All right, thank you. I guess, are there any questions or comments about tornadoes? I had a very narrow scope of research, so I might not have the answer, but I can definitely hear the questions. Yeah.
I wondered how far away this Mr. Sohn was, that he could get, if he lived in Pipestone, how did he get down to Jasper fast enough?
I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not sure if those first 3 photos are his either, but once I heard Lucille had only taken 3, and those are definitely a series, I'm not sure who the photographer was. And I did speak, this is one of those, another interesting piece of history that just blows through geographical lines. So Lucille is in South Dakota. The tornado is in Pipestone County. And the photographs have ended up in the Rock County Museum. So it is just great that we can work with the Rock County Historical Society and other historical societies around, our neighbors, in really working out some of this history. But they don't know who took those photos either. But it's definitely in with their things about the 1927 tornado, and it looks like it too. So. All right, well, grab another snack here, and thank you again.